Hello, we're back and we're doing another economics lesson. Last time we did supply and demand. This time we're doing supply and demand. They're combined. So, last time when I drew the curves, I was only drawing the supply curve and the demand curve separately. This is how it looks like on one graph. I've drawn 4 of them, as you can see, and I'm going to be showing you why. Now, when you see these curves, do you see the point where they meet? Right here? That's called the equilibrium. The equilibrium is essentially where all the goods produced are sold, which means that there is equal supply and equal demand. Hence, it's the point where they meet. So that's where we get the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. This is basically what everybody wants. This is the allocative efficient point. Allocated efficiency means everyone who demands the good gets the good in this case. So PE is the equilibrium price, to summarize that, and QE is the equilibrium quantity. Now, the reason why equilibrium is good is because suppliers who obviously produce the products at, let's just say this unit is 1,500, right? Okay, they produce 1,500 units, and what's demanded is 1,500 units because they're both equal. That means that at price PE, let's just say $15, at $15, they're willing to buy 1,500 units, and they're willing to supply 1,500 units. Now, if you get where this is going, that means all your output, imagine you're a supplier, all your output has been sold. Good for you. You make as much profit as you can from this market. There's no missed opportunities, there's no overproduction, it's just efficiency. And this is perfect because buyers, they get the lowest price at PE, while they also benefit from, of course, having the right supply. So every buyer is supplied. Now, I'm going to talk to you about excess supply and excess demand. So I'm going to first go over excess, whatever I draw first. Now let's just say this is here. Okay, cool. Now, if you see this at P1, I hope that's clear. Hold on. Let me just try making this a little bit more clear for you. Yes. There you go. Now, this area over here is called the excess supply. Or you can say it's the area between QD is to QS. That could also be your area of excess supply. Now, essentially this happens a lot. For example, minimum wage, right? I know it sounds weird, minimum wage, but you're setting a higher price. Yeah, that's what minimum means. You're setting a higher price than the equilibrium. Now, assume this is a job market. This is the supply for labor and demand for labor, let's just say. Now, this is, instead of price, assume it's wages. And instead of Q, it's going to be employment or workers. Now, at PE, that's the wage that employers are willing to pay for and workers are willing to work for, right? That's the point. That's the equilibrium, right? PE, QE. But now, the government sets a minimum wage of P1. That means firms have to pay this amount. Obviously, that's above their, equilibrium. That's above their pay grade. They're like, I'm not going to pay, that much for a worker. I'm not going to pay a worker 20 euros an hour. Who do you think I am? Huh? So, essentially, what happens is that there's an excess supply. Because, yes, since the wage rate has gone up, let's just say at any store like McDonald's, right? The minimum wage is higher. Oh, nice. So now, since there's an increase in the wage, obviously there's going to be more workers, right? Because, hey, if there's more wage, if they make more money, then more people are inclined to work at McDonald's. So more people work. From here, it moves from the equilibrium, the movement, by the way, it moves to the right. The supply moves to the right. From QE to QS, it moves. While the demand will contract and move to the left from QE to QD over here. That creates the excess supply. We cool? Now, the reason this is bad is because there's a mismatch between the supply and demand. That means that less workers are going to be employed than the ones who are willing to work. Essentially is what it means. So that means that there's going to be unemployment because excess supply, right? They have to, fire some workers. They can't keep it like this. And eventually, the supply should contract to meet the demand over here. This is the job market, but in other markets, excess supply is bad because it leads to an overproduction. They don't value the good at this price, so then that leads to an overproduction. Now let's talk about excess demand. I'm going to put it over here. Excess demand is actually lower than the price, than the equilibrium price. QSQD P1. Excess demand. Now, you're supposed to label it, but I'm not really good at labeling these curves, especially on a whiteboard. So I'm just gonna, if you can understand that terrible handwriting, then that's the excess demand. So excess supply is above the curve, excess demand is below the curve. Just remember that part. So now, this time, I know that there's one real world example about this, and that's CEOs and their maximum wages, but I don't really know. No, I don't know anything actually. I don't know any examples of this. But essentially what happens is you're supplying at PE originally, PEQE, equilibrium, but now, for some reason, maybe because of regulation changes, you have to price it at P1, right? Now, of course, hey, that's, that good is cheaper. Since that good is cheaper, there's going to be an extension in the demand. It's going to move to the right over here, while the supply curve is going to contract over here from QE to QS and the demand from QE to QD. So what happens is that there's now an excess demand. Since the price is lower, more people are willing to pay for it, but because the price is lower, less people are willing to supply it, if that makes sense. So that means that there's an excess demand, which means there's a shortage in the market. Over here, there was an overproduction, but now over here, since we're moving to excess demand, there's a shortage in the market, which means that firms, if they had just, increased that price, buyers would be willing to pay that price for producers, and they'll be able to make more profits, and more buyers would be satisfied. Now, here is a weird example. This is a restriction in the quantity, not the price. Usually it doesn't happen, but sometimes it does. And this explanation is a little bit fishy, so I'm gonna try to simplify it the best I can. Now, this is a restriction, an increase in the restriction. And basically, you're forcing this product on buyers. And of course, sellers will benefit, as you can see. They get higher prices, while buyers they also pay prices over here. Now, you think to yourself, okay, one second, a higher price for suppliers, lower price for buyers. Is that not just beneficial to both? But actually, it's bad. Listen, let's talk about oil for a second, right? Now, imagine this is 15, I don't know what kind of world you live in, but 15 euros a barrel. And then now over here, it's 5 euros a barrel for them. So PD in this case isn't actually the price that they're paying. I think it's more of the value. It's basically what they value it as. Now, over here, you can see that they value oil at 5 euros a barrel, right? But while it's being sold at 15 euros a barrel to sellers, right? Now, here's an issue, right? This will lead to wasted resources. This can also be called a deadweight loss, or in this case, it's wasted resources. I'm just gonna write wasted resources. Yep. So in this case, it's the wasted resources because, of course, buyers are not willing to pay this price of 15 euros a barrel, but at the same time, they only value it at 5. Now, imagine, let's just say, that it is sold at 15 euros a barrel. That is still bad for society, because people, they don't, suppliers are supplying a 15 euro a barrel value of oil, while two people who only buy the oil at 5 euros a barrel. Now, this is bad for society, because consumers don't get the extra satisfaction because they aren't able to justify production. Now, usually a normal supply and demand diagram, we would actually, the price would be more like the entry. Are you willing, let's just say the price of oil jumps up to 50 euros a barrel, right? Are you willing to pay that price? Probably not. I don't know, maybe. I don't know if that's cheap or not, but in my eyes, I guess it's not cheap. 50 euros a barrel. So, are you willing to pay that price? No, you don't buy it and you substitute instead. Yes, you buy it and you're happy with it because that's the value you paid. You value oil more than the price or equal to the price, which is why you bought it. But in this case, as you can see, it's being sold 15 and it's valued at 5. Clearly, there's a mismatch between the buyers and the sellers, and there's wasted resources. Now, in this case over here, there is actually a restriction on the quantity at Q1, and now I'm going to make another triangle over here, and this is going to be PS, and this is going to be PD. Now, over here, this is a shortage once again, right? So, the good is being valued, let's just say, let's just go back to oil, right? Imagine oil is being valued at 15 euros a barrel, but is now instead being sold at 5 or produced at 5 euros a barrel. Now you'd think it's a good thing, but here's the issue, right? So because it's valued at 15 and it's produced at 5, and there's obviously a limited quantity at Q1, that means not every single buyer is able to buy the oil. So in this case, they're supplying a lower value product for a higher, when there's more value that buyers have for the product. So in this case, if producers would just increase the price over here, there'd be more than enough consumers and buyers to justify that cost, that increase in cost, right? If they can supply more oil, if they can supply oil at a higher price, maybe, then of course that would move production to QE, and that would be better for society. By the way, this part over here, these two parts are a little more confusing. This one is more of the economics that I'm used to, which is why this was a lot easier for me to explain. But let me go back to the first one, right? There's another reason why the first one is bad. So in economics, we we know that most resources in this world are scarce. Nothing is infinite in economics. That's why economics is a science. That's why it exists, because there's scarcity. It's the main idea behind it. Scarcity, incentives, supply, demand, etc. Now, so since suppliers are using 15 euros of resources to produce this good, or to produce oil in the first example over here, that means that they're using land, labor, and capital to produce a good that's only valued at 5 euros. There is a mismatch between values, right? That means that even though suppliers are getting a higher price, even though buyers are getting potentially a lower price, right? It's still not valued. If suppliers had just moved that production to a different good, for example, textbooks, or maybe rubber duckies or something, or I don't know, anything else, right? They would be able to be at the equilibrium, which is what they want. And buyers, by the way, because they're forced to get this oil at this cheap price, this cheap price of 5 euros, they don't want that oil for 5 euros. They would rather be paying 10 euros for the oil, but 10 euros because it's the equilibrium, by the way. See, 15, 5, 10. So now, they would rather be paying 10 euros for that oil if they can get more resources in general. Because think about it, if you're using land, labor, capital to produce a good that's only valued at 5 euros, then if you had just allocated that land, labor, capital to some other product like textbooks, the papers, rubber duckies, bags, I don't know, then that would create more value in society, and that would create a social benefit to everybody. Which is why this example, while it looks like a win-win, it's a lose-lose situation. And this one, shortage in the market, self-explanatory. Both of these examples are, of course, cases of dead weight loss. By the way, you see how I cut out my ums and you knows? I'm trying to get better at teaching. Criticize me, please criticize me in the comments. I learned about this from my professor actually, but he said that economics is a model. It's a theory, it's a model, it's a logic that shows you the consequences of deviating from the equilibrium. What happens to the market, the job market, to the agricultural market when you deviate from these prices, when you overproduce, when you underproduce, how much are you losing, how much are you making? And what about when the firm comes into the market, how does that impact your cost curves? That's what economics is all about. It shows you the consequences of deviations from the model. And the thing you gotta understand about economics is everything is interlinked. It is a constantly changing, it's a dynamic panel of markets that constantly reflect on one another. They change, they impact each other, because while, like, I'm gonna take this example of tomatoes. Imagine tomatoes are in season, right? That means that farmers are able to sell more tomatoes, and that means because they're able to sell more tomatoes and because there's more supply of the tomatoes, that means that, of course, the price will fall. As you can see over here in this little curve I drew, P2, P1, Q, Q1, Q2. There's more tomatoes in the market and they're being supplied at a lower cost. That means that assuming tomatoes is a core item that consumers buy, that means that they're spending less of their income on tomatoes, and that means that they get more income in general. With more income, that means that they can buy more goods that they would otherwise not buy, because for some reason tomatoes are so crucial to their diet that it reflects like this. That means that with more income, they're able to, of course, this is a shift in supply with the Heliante. So with more income, they're able to shift their demand like this, boom, boom, and that reflects on another firm. Oh wow, they're willing to pay higher prices. Okay, let's shift the quantity outward. That means that this is basically a ripple effect in the economy. The supply change in one item impacts so many things. It's unbelievable. And in economics, we honestly cannot fathom how much a change in price, a change in supply, a change in the demand, the preferences, whatever, right? We can't fathom the impact it has on the economy. Honestly, it's just insane. Basically, what else do I say? That's about it. Actually, we do have a little bit more to talk about. I'm just flipping to my book right now. Okay, yeah. Let's talk about shifts and changes. I wasn't supposed to go over this in this lesson, but since we're already doing, equilibrium and stuff, I thought we might as well go over this, right? Now, like I explained in the last few videos, there is, of course, an equilibrium, and there are two curves you're seeing, supply and demand. Now, of course, I kept talking about this last time, but there's a shift. There's a difference between a shift and a movement in supply and in demand. Now, if you look at this curve over here, I hope to draw it fast enough before I can finish my sentence. And yeah, here it is. So, Q, E, P, E. Okay, now, assuming, let's just say, you're talking about a change in price. A change in price means a movement in the curve. That means that, let's just say, price, let's just say it's over here. For some reason, the price falls, right? That means that, as you can see, let's not use this example. We already have an example of that. It's here in the minimum wage example, or in the lower maximum price, for example. As you can see, when there is a change in the price, there's a movement in both the supply and demand. You can see that it's not a new curve forming, instead it's moving along the curve. So when it's increasing, for example, in this case, demand, as you can see, it's increasing from QE to QD, that means there's an extension in the demand. Or you could just say rightward movement, but they like the term extension. And when it's falling, in this case, QE to QS, that means there's a contraction in supply or a contraction in the curve, whatever. And now, in this case over here, when we talk about, like in the last video, we talked about the conditions that affect supply and demand, you gotta understand that these changes actually, they reflect structural changes, underlying changes in the economy, which prices otherwise wouldn't reflect. Prices are more of the short term, and we're going to get to that next video about Hayek. But for now, just know that whenever there's a change in demand, a change in supply for a product, for a market, for an individual, or even aggregate in the whole nation, or maybe even global, that means that there's an underlying change in the economy, which is what's shifting the curve. So let's just say an increase in income in the economy, or maybe just your own personal income, it'll change D2. That is your new demand curve right there. As you can see, P1, Q1, da 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 da. There we go. You're supposed to draw arrows, but I'm not drawing my arrows right now. That's called a rightward shift in the demand. Now, I don't think there's a term for this, like a shift in demand. This is called a shift, so you just talk about the direction. Usually, a rightward shift or an outward shift in the curve means that there's an increase in the quantity of the curve. Here is a rough example of supply. As you can see, Q1, Q2. An outward extension of the curve means that there's an increase in the quantity. Now, that's if it shifts to the right or shifts outwards. What if it shifts to the left? Okay, now let's take the demand example over here. S1, sorry, what the hell am I doing? D1, S1, here you go, QE, PE. Oh, by the way, in some of these cases I labeled it as P1, P2, or just, you can label P1 as PE or whatever you want to. I personally label it as PE and QE, but it's interchangeable, it doesn't matter. As long as you label the next one, you know, in chronological order, like P1, P2, or P2, P3, then it doesn't matter or what you label it as. It just matters about the order and the logic, and if it's easy to follow. So now in this case, let's talk about contraction in the demand. Or not a contraction, sorry, but like a fall in the demand, right? A leftward shift. Now if it shifts from D1 to D2, as you can see, the price will fall. I didn't draw these arrows straight, sorry. So then let's just say example is people think that the price of, let's just say, books will fall in the future, right? Now, if they think that books are going to fall in the future, they won't be willing to spend as much today because the price is going to fall eventually. So why would I spend more today? Then that would obviously cause a fall in the price to P1, and there's a shift. Now, of course, there's another one, and it can be the same thing said for supply. In this case, S1, S2, D1, da 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 da, P1, Q1, Q2, P2. Now, in this case, let's just say bad weather impacts the U.S.'s corn production. That means that farmers will have yet less yield, which means that supermarkets will be supplying less corn because of the bad weather, which means it'll be reflected in their prices and, of course, scarcity, and it'll also be reflected in the price. Now, it shifts to the left because there's less supply, shifting quantity from Q1 to Q2, and the price to go up from P1 to P2. I'm going to talk to you about the Hayek real quick. I just want to give you a little hint of what's about to come, right? Now, Hayek says that these prices reflect scarcity and reflect availability. Now, as you can see, when the price rises, that shows you that the resource is more scarce. And this is honestly true for any example you look at, any economy, in any market. He says that price basically condenses millions of signals and information into one single mechanism, or one single signal. Okay, now to summarize what I taught you in this video, and I hope what you learned. Hope you learned the difference between movement and a shift. I hope you learned about what excess supply and excess demand is. Hope you also learned what happens when you deviate from the equilibrium. I hope you understand why we reach the equilibrium, and I hope at least one of you watching this video, at least someone watching this video, whatever struggles you're going through right now, hope you find a way out of it.